Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing a video on the Central Motorway and Newcastle's unbuilt motorway system. So you probably know Newcastle obviously has the Central Motorway, and this is like the main north-south route throughout the city for outside motor traffic. But the original plans for this actually was for a much larger motorway network that would crisscross the whole city and would almost entangle the city centre, creating almost like an island. So the Central Motorway is a portion of urban motorway within Newcastle upon Tyne. Its actual full name is Central Motorway East, which indicates obviously the original intentions for the scheme was a series of motorways running through central Newcastle. The plans to form the rest of these motorways have since been abandoned, and what remains is actually a fragment of the former system, which sort of explains why it is designed the way it is, and that is because it was designed to be able to connect in with other systems that weren't actually built. In order to understand the context of this and the need for this urban motorway system, I think it's important to explain Newcastle's urban development. So obviously Northumberland Street has been Newcastle's main retail street and main high street for a number of decades, and this was even the case before the Central Motorway. Previously this road actually used to be the A1, so the Tyne Bridge used to actually flow up through Pilgrim Street and onto Northumberland Street, and then eventually join the Great North Road. So the main road to Edinburgh through Newcastle was down this street, the Northumberland Street. Shopping demand obviously increased during this time, and this obviously put pressure on this narrow street as well as increasing traffic as well. Interventions were made such as pedestrian elevated crossings and sort of trying to improve the environment for pedestrians, but it was clear that this wasn't really working, and this overcrowding would actually need further intervention to make a safe environment. You've probably seen old photos with traffic going both ways and Christmas shoppers absolutely crammed onto the tiny pavements on either side of the road. So the Central Motorway would actually make an effective bypass in Newcastle city centre. This obviously massively needed as a jump in car ownership from 2 million people, or 2 million vehicles in 1950 to 9 million vehicles in 1961. So this sort of stoked a fear that the outdated road system would actually be paralysed by the influx of road vehicles. Roads were fast also becoming the main method of transport in British commerce. Obviously this was reduction in the railways, and this will obviously lead to so many more items being transported by road. And then as a bit of policy background to this, so in the 1960s a guy called Colin Buchan produced a report called Traffic in Towns. As part of this he had a number of radical proposals for cities, and this idea was sort of separating pedestrians and traffic on different levels. This report aimed at a radical reconstruction of city centres in order to support this, to allow for obviously the increasing car demand and obviously pedestrians as well. Construction commenced on the 4th of April 1972 and was expected to last for 2.5 to 3 years. The Coast Road Motorway was also due to be started in 1972, with completion around the same time as the Central Motorway East. However, work on the Coast Road was postponed by order of the Department of the Environment, due to being the subject of a public inquiry. Another part of the system was the Shields Road Motorway. This aimed at directing traffic away from the high street in Byker of Shields Road. This was scheduled for construction in 1974. Another link was the East-West Underground Link. This was due to be started in 1975 and would link the Central Motorway east to west east of the Central Motorway was the henceforth named Central Motorway East Bypass. This was scheduled to start in the more distant future of 1985, and this was the idea that they needed. This was to handle the increasing levels of car traffic they thought would actually come through Newcastle. So on the Gateshead side of the river, a viaduct was built alongside the town centre. This would divert traffic away from the main Gateshead High Street and towards the Tyne Bridge. It was designed by Ove Arup and Partners in 1965. The other routes that were meant to be built alongside the Central Motorway, such as the Central Motorway West and Central Motorway East Bypass, were never actually constructed. This was due to a policy shift caused by the creation of the new Tyne and Wear County Council. Money was being diverted from road building to actually work on the Tyne and Wear Metro. As if you remember from my previous video, I'll link here, is that in order to complete the metro in a time of financial crisis, the Tyne and Wear County Council committed all of their transport funds to the metro. So it was either one or the other. So it was either a complete motorway system or a complete metro system. The county council at the time decided that a complete metro system was the better choice. To this day, Newcastle and Gateshead don't actually have an extensive urban motorway system, but they do have one, obviously the best light rail systems outside of London. During the construction stage of the Central Motorway, the plans for the metro were already in place, and therefore they wouldn't want to dig up this area again or tunnel underneath this new foundations to the motorway, so they actually put the tunnel section in ready, so when they built the metro they could tunnel into this and just put the track straight through. So this would actually allow the line from Tyne via North Shields to pass through the newly excavated Central Motorway without this need to be disturbed again in the near future. The Central Motorway actually is the only motorway in the UK to have a double-deck section, and this is between Jesmond and Barras Bridge, where the southbound carriageway runs underneath the northbound. If you know anything about Newcastle's medieval history, you might have heard of Pand Dean. This was a former waterway that's since been infilled. In medieval times, Pand and Dean provide a natural and easy defendable boundary to the city of Newcastle. The Dean actually ran from Barras Bridge near Newcastle University, across the site of the Civic Centre, and then follows the old railway route from Jesmond to Manors. So in the middle of the 18th century, this Dean began to be infilled with refuse. Most of this was actually refuse from septic tanks and was human waste. The stream itself was actually diverted through a culvert. The filling of the Dean continued. The Dean actually used to be 80 feet deep, which was now completely filled. The only remnants of this are in place names such as Barras Bridge. This actually posed a problem for the Central Motorway East construction, as they had to try and find a solid base of bridges and retaining walls, and they managed to do this by piling foundations into the bedrock below the Dean. A number of servicing tunnels were also created underneath the Central Motorway. Gas, water and electricity supplying the city services would need to get under the Central Motorway. They would also need to allow future access to these systems, as unlike usual carriageways, the operators of these utilities couldn't just dig up the motorway and stop traffic in order to replace or repair services. This actually meant a service tunnel was actually created underneath, and this is actually known as Pandon Service Tunnel and still can be accessed to this day. In terms of financing the system, the capital cost of the motorway, just the east section, was estimated to be around £11.5 million, with £7.7 million going towards construction and £2.3 million going towards design fees, charges for drainage works and sort of land, and also compensation for taking that land. So the total cost of the motorway is estimated to be £40 million to £45 million in 1972 prices. I'm going to look at some of the key developments that happened alongside the Central Motorway East, sort of lock it into the area we see now. So Swan House, as part of the construction of Central Motorway East, a large office development was also conceived as part of the scheme. This would be a key gateway site to the city, as travelling along Central Motorway East, you'd actually travel beneath this building and then Manors car park in order to reach the city centre. This scheme was built between 1963 and 1969. The scheme was named after North East inventor Joseph Swan, who actually invented the light bulb, hence the name Swan House. This development was constructed as a BT office complex. It was a brutalist icon on Tyneside, which matched the style at the time. And then as the requirements for office spaces within the city centre changed, this office space was actually converted into residential apartments in 2002. However, I've included this because the construction of Swan House is quite important in understanding sort of the planning ideas at this time. The construction of this Swan House meant that the Royal Arcade, designed by famous Tyneside architect John Dobson, was actually lost. This building was constructed between 1831 and 1832, and it's actually laid on the edge of the city centre since then. It had never been a commercial success due to its location. However, it had been recognised for its architectural merit before this. The facade of this had actually meant to be originally retained during the Swan House scheme and sort of kept. Another large-scale development as part of this redevelopment scheme was Manors car park. In order to facilitate the influx of cars into the city centre, new car parking was needed. This was designed in a brutalist style, which was popular at the time. The actual usage of this car park has been falling in recent years, and the top floor of the car park has since been closed off. Another large development in this area was the Bank of England house. The Bank of England offices were previously located on Grey Street in a Tyneside classical building. In 1971, needing bigger premises, the bank was relocated to the new purpose-built building on Pilgrim Street. The purpose-designed structure was impossible to let for alternative uses after the Bank of England closed their small network of UK branches in 1990. The site has laid vacant since. Planning permission has recently been granted for a new tower on the Bank of England site. It's actually taller than the nearby Swan House roundabout, which already doesn't turn favours, so it'll be interesting to see how this is actually perceived. Another important consideration building the motorway is Holy Jesus Hospital. So this is one of the main heritage buildings within the area of the Central Motorway. It's a Grade 2 star listed building, so the highest it can be, constructed in 1681. The site has been in use for 700 years, helping townspeople with uses from being a friar's to an almshouse and even a soup kitchen. This building was luckily conserved during the Central Motorway East construction. However, the construction has left it in a very unfavourable state. It's located next to the Swan House roundabout, so it's a huge scheme, and it's only accessible through use of one of the subways from the city centre, and it's almost submerged and overtaken by the concrete of the motorway and the concrete of Manors car park next to it. Now to cover the unopened sections of the motorway. So what we're seeing here is we're left with one half of a motorway system that runs across from the Tyne Bridge all the way up to the north of Barras Bridge, which then links into the Claremont Road motorway. So Central Motorway West. As part of the new system, the idea was to create a ring road around the city centre, allowing traffic to obviously bypass. This new bridge would cross the River Tyne, where the Retty Bridge is. This would have then followed up St James's Boulevard, past St James's Park, then past St Thomas's Church, linking with the Central Motorway and finally heading up north up the Great North Road. The Central Motorway West would actually link to the Central Motorway East and East Bypass and out to the Shields Road motorway. This would actually involve travelling underground underneath the existing Northumberland Street. So connecting these two motorways as another motorway would actually be underground underneath the city. So it sort of shows how the planners were really taking into consideration Colin Buchan's traffic in towns. They're really trying to go for a multi-level city with motorways underground, pedestrians, and obviously local traffic all on different decks of the city. Central Motorway East Bypass. So a second motorway was planned to the east of the existing Central Motorway, as obviously the concern was that car demand would actually put too much pressure on the existing network. This, as you saw from the date, was going to open a lot later than Central Motorway East and was planning for sort of future increases in car ownership. This route would have come off the Gateshead flyover, crossed the river at a new bridge similar to where the current day Sage Music Hall is located. This would have then crossed the river where the Law Courts and East Quayside is located. This would have then followed up the Tyne Gorge to the east of Manors Railway Station. This would first link the Shields Road motorway at Newbridge Street, and to the north this would actually bypass Central Motorway East and then link up. To the west of Shields Road motorway, this would then head underneath the city and then connect up Central Motorway West. So this would actually effectively cut off the city centre in a tangle of ring roads, effectively forming an island of the city centre, disconnecting it from suburbs such as Jesmond, Heaton, and also Fenham. But this is actually part of the plan. They wanted to disconnect Newcastle and they wanted to make the central zone a central heritage zone and an area where pedestrians will be prioritised. Another part of the scheme, if you can currently see from the network, Biker Shields Road bypass does seem very over-engineered. It does seem very extensive for what it is, and that's for a good reason, because originally there were also further plans for a new crossing of the Tyne further down the river. This is a little bit long after. This is known as the Friargoose crossing. So this was a planned crossing of the Tyne that would have linked the Felling bypass to the north of Shields Road roundabout. This would then allow vehicles to travel up Chillingham Road or along the Shields Road bypass into the city centre over the Biker Bridge. This project is not actually featured very much. It was only briefly mentioned in 1972, and then the project was unfortunately cancelled in 1975 along with the other projects. And obviously this was never built, so now you're left with this over-engineered bypass that then which currently disconnects the biker redevelopment of the biker wall from the Shields Road High Street. As part of the plans to redevelop the city centre to allow for more car traffic, it also implemented other ideas from the Buchanan report. The idea of this was to separate pedestrians and traffic on different levels throughout the city. This would have seen pedestrians built on a deck above the city centre and cars travelling beneath. Some of this network was built, and it lies to the east of the City Library. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the extent of this network and how it lies and what's actually happened to it. I think I'll cover this in a separate video, because I do think it's an interesting topic to discuss and a thing to look at. Obviously, it was a system that was it now operates on its own when it was designed to be a system of motorways. It wasn't designed to carry the amount of traffic that exists today and travels up it today. It also wasn't designed for cars to travel at the speed they do now. Obviously, it was designed when cars wouldn't be able to accelerate as quick as they can. The whole system is limited to 50 miles an hour, but some of the junctions end up with cars accessing on the fast lane or having to pull out on the fast lane. This was explained during the briefs as being trying to reduce the amount of space this took out of the city centre by having only routes which were needed being sort of added to the junctions. You can't go every direction. Sometimes it will suggest you go down to another junction, but if you were to drive on them now, you would actually reach some junctions which just feel very unsafe at busy times. It's not an enjoyable road to drive on, and I do think it's a massive safety issue until it gets sorted. Another issue of the Central Motorway was the limited access to the city centre. So beforehand, Newcastle already had a grid of streets that allow pedestrians to obviously walk on the path in a number of locations into the city centre. Building the Central Motorway East, the amount of pedestrian routes in the city centre reduced to around 4 routes to get over and through the motorway. Some of these were narrow underpasses or narrow elevated walkways, and these are not really pleasurable environments for pedestrians to use. So this sort of discouraged pedestrians from accessing the city centre. This actually has a further knock-on impact, as it in turn limited the development of the city centre on the east side of the Central Motorway. As you can see from Google Images, the city centre doesn't actually spread that much further than Central Motorway East, as this is navigable. This is actually a barrier for a lot of places to cross. I still think now, even today with modern developments, there's not enough access routes and there's not enough pleasurable routes to get across. This did change slightly in 2008 as part of their new campus on the east side of Central Motorway. A new pedestrian bridge was built across. This was done by Northumbria University as part of their business and design campus. This one was actually of a much higher design quality than previous crossings. It was actually built at a step level. It was actually built at a flat level, so there's no need to climb an elevated walkway to get across. You can do it at a flat level, which is a great improvement for obviously wheelchair users, not having to navigate steep slopes. And this also actually benefits cyclists as well, wouldn't have to dismount or climb up a steep hill to get across. However, the further interventions are still needed to sort of improve the access to the centre from the east of the city. And you can see if the whole route and the whole system was constructed, the city centre now would be an absolute island that'd be hard to access. Thank you very much for watching. My AirPods just died. I probably was going to say a few more thoughts, but that's it. Everything for this video. I'm probably going to do a video now on the skywalks and the redevelopment of Eldon Square, as I think all these things do tie in together, and it's quite hard to decide where to individually cut these ideas off, as during the 60s and 70s the whole idea of planning the city centre was going to be radically changed. So I'm probably going to talk about some of these topics again, but yeah. Thank you very much for watching. If you want to see something else from me, I do anything Tyneside related, anything planning related. So thank you.